Guys, what's up and welcome back to another BBOD talk. Today I'm super excited as we have Rune Christensen, the CEO and founder of MakerDAO, joining us today for an interview, and it's really great to have you here on the channel, Rune.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so great to have you. I know this is a really interesting stablecoin and we have a lot of interesting topics to talk about today, so it should be a good interview. So I'll just get started with the questions. So first of all, if you could just explain to us, Rune, what is a stablecoin and why is it something every crypto investor should hold in their portfolios?
A stablecoin is really, as the name suggests, a coin or a cryptocurrency that has stable value. And so I would say that I wouldn't necessarily say that a stablecoin is something an investor should have in their portfolio, right? Because by nature it's stable, so it's not really an investment, I guess you could say. But it's incredibly useful for investors and traders and anyone sort of operating in the crypto space, because it's very easy to go from like a stable coin to Ethereum or Bitcoin, for instance, rather than having to go from fiat and bank accounts and then into the crypto sphere.
Okay, that's great to know. So can you now explain to us like how the MakerDAO project started, how it all began?
Yeah, of course. It's quite old, actually. In fact, MakerDAO is probably one of the oldest projects in the Ethereum space, and maybe even sort of the blockchain beyond Bitcoin space in general. But it really all started actually with the BitShares project. So a different project actually called BitShares, which is even older than even Ethereum. That was the first project to invent the decentralized stablecoin. And a couple of people from the BitShares community then discovered Ethereum, and basically we migrated over to the Ethereum blockchain and built a new project on Ethereum that was just purely focused on trying to make the best possible decentralized stablecoin. And that was about, that's more than 4 years ago. And so basically since then, we've just been working and researching and iterating on the concept. And then finally, in December 2017, so about 1.5 years ago, we launched the first version of the system. The first decentralized stablecoin on Ethereum, which is called DAI.
Yeah, okay, that's great to know. My next question is now leading in to the DAI stablecoin. So for our viewers at home that don't really understand that much about DAI or stablecoins, can you sort of like simply explain in plain language how the DAI stablecoin works and sort of provide some comparison to other stablecoins, sort of like Tether and the other kind of well-known stablecoins out there?
Right, so there's like two types of stablecoins, right? There's the centralized stablecoin like Tether, and then there's a decentralized stablecoin like DAI, for instance. And I think it's probably easiest to explain how a centralized stablecoin works first. So basically the way Tether and other stablecoins of the kind work is that there's essentially a trusted authority or trusted custodian that holds a bunch of, let's say, dollars in a bank account, and then they issue tokens on the blockchain that they then promise to redeem one-to-one for the money in their bank account, right? So you might have, let's say, $500 million in a bank account and then 500 million tokens circulating in the economy. And through that one-to-one backing, it's quite easy to see then how the token becomes stable, right? Because you can always redeem it for $1. And of course, the problem is then, with even very recently, right, there's been this doubt around whether Tether is actually fully backed and whether you can actually trust the custodian with Tether specifically. So that's kind of the downside of centralized stablecoins, right? Is that they ultimately still has this classic issue of centralization, right? Where there is some trusted counterparty that as a user, you're exposed to the risk of the counterparty. And so the big difference with DAI is that DAI runs on a decentralized network. So there's no custodian, there's no authority, there's no single point of failure in the system. Rather, there is simply a fully autonomous smart contract system on the Ethereum blockchain that actually runs all of the mechanisms necessary to keep DAI stable. And so the primary and sort of the chief mechanism that keeps DAI stable is the collateralization. So basically that for all DAI there is in circulation, there is basically an amount higher than the DAI in circulation of collateral assets sitting on the blockchain. So basically DAI uses blockchain technology to sort of prove and actually constantly guarantee that there is real value sitting on the blockchain that backs the DAI stablecoin that is in circulation. So, and one of the big advantages is that this value on the blockchain, it doesn't have to be just, it's rather than being just one counterparty, it's actually many different types of assets potentially, right? So it can both be Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies, but it could also be things like security tokens representing real world value. So you end up with, as a user, having a wide range of diversified risk rather than being exposed to sort of a single point of failure or a single source of risk. You have this like very diversified, very spread out risk where there isn't really one single thing that could bring down the whole system.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think now our viewers will have a good understanding of how that works. I'd like to now focus on the on-chain collateral-backed stablecoins, where their design differs from the traditional asset-backed design in some ways. So there are many promising projects that are already out there that are trying to compete with DAI. So how is DAI positioned amongst these less known on-chain collateral-backed stablecoins, and what do you think are the main competitive advantages of the DAI design?
Right. So I would say definitely that the main advantage of DAI is the first mover advantage, right? So in particular that DAI, first of all, has been live for a very long time, but also has built up a tremendous network effect already. So the DAI ecosystem of like startups, dApps, various projects that have integrated DAI or other components of the DAI system or the MakerDAO system. These projects in the ecosystem number more than 200 at this point. So there's actually really a lot of like grassroots activity all over the ecosystem. And that's where ultimately the value of a stablecoin comes from, a network effect, right? That's built up amongst the people in the economy that use it. And in general, I'm actually not really aware of many other stablecoins that use a similar design. So there are certain other decentralized collateral-backed stablecoins in existence, but typically they only use one type of collateral. So they kind of focus on a specific mechanism rather than the approach that DAI takes, which is to, rather than putting all the eggs in one basket, actually spreading out the risk amongst a very large portfolio of different collateral types. So all in all, I mean, of course, there's always going to be copycats in the future, and there's going to be a lot of different projects trying to a large extent doing the same thing. And fundamentally, what they'll always, the advantage that DAI will always have is this already very well established network effect that comes from being the first and that comes from operating successfully for a long time.
Yeah, I guess because you said MakerDAO has been like around for 4 years now, and the DAI coin, like, it's a lot more well established, and a lot of people seem to have a much better understanding of it, and the community seems to be really informed. Like, everyone seems to know exactly what's going on. There never seems to be any confusion within the community, and everyone seems to just be informed all the time of updates and developments.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, of course, it's a very complex system. So that's sort of the natural, there's like a natural characteristic of collateralized stablecoins is that there has to be a lot of complexity on the system that sits on the blockchain itself. And that means, in the end, no one is really fully informed, right? In fact, as a community, we're still actively doing research together, especially in terms of the governance of the system, right? So how are you supposed to control and regulate and ultimately stabilize this kind of system. But then the big advantage is that the community is quite well informed, right? And they understand the challenges and understand what kind of skills and just like solutions we have to look for and bring to the table in order to actually solve the issues.
Yeah, okay, that's great to hear. So now I wanted to move on to one of the disadvantages of on-chain collateral-backed stablecoins is price stability. So very often they tend to lose their peg to the underlying asset. So how are you sort of working with DAI to try and maybe solve this problem if this problem occurs within DAI?
Yeah, so there's kind of like two types of stability to consider with on-chain collateralized stablecoins. So the first and most important type of stability is long-term stability, right? So it's kind of like resilience against a total collapse of the system. Basically, that you don't want your DAI to one day just be worthless and it sucks, right? And that could be whatever, because there's many reasons why something like that could happen conceivably, right? But the most common is that the collateral just crashes to nothing, right? Or maybe there's different reasons why something like that could happen. And the main mitigation strategy that DAI uses is, again, to have many different types of collateral, right? So instead of having one collateral type that can collapse to nothing one day, you actually want to have, let's say, hundreds of different collateral types. And even if one of them collapses, it doesn't really matter for the overall system, because sort of the rest of the collateral portfolio is able to absorb this risk. So currently, the DAI system doesn't actually have this multi-collateral feature built yet. So it's actually, we're still in the beta which is actually called single collateral DAI. So we're still in the beta where we only use Ethereum as collateral, but we are very, very close to actually launching the full version of the system, which is the multi-collateral DAI that supports many types of collateral and then is able to really well mitigate this black swan risk of a sudden crash in a collateral type. So in addition to the risk of long-term, like the long-term stability risks, which applies, they actually apply to every financial system, right? So it's not just stablecoins that have this issue. Even banks can potentially fail if they're not properly governed and risk managed. But like another issue, I guess you could say, right? Another like specific problem that stablecoin, like the on-chain collateralized, decentralized stablecoins deal with, is price stability in the short term. So basically how to keep the peg on a day-to-day basis with as high liquidity as possible. And like recently, DAI has actually been encountering this problem quite significantly. So basically what has happened is that the DAI peg has gone a bit soft, essentially, which means that sometimes as people try to sell large amounts of DAI, for instance, they may not actually be able to sell it at $1, but rather have to go lower to like 95 cents or something. And the reason why a situation like that occurs is fundamentally because supply and demand is not in balance, right? So when the price of an asset goes below $1, or when the price of a stablecoin goes below $1, it means that supply is higher than demand, right? So there's a lot more DAI in circulation, that there are people who are willing to buy that DAI, and that causes the price to go down. And then the reason for that is because, like, the reason why there is more supply than there is demand is basically because the interest rates of the system has not been set correctly, and the result is that it's a lot cheaper to borrow DAI than to borrow sort of other assets. And when you borrow DAI, you sort of, like, the result is that the circulating supply of the asset increases, and then you get this like too much supply versus not enough demand issue. And so the solution is to increase the interest rates. And then the reason why the DAI peg then has gone soft is because interest rates have not been increased fast enough. And that's back to this, the fact that, despite the system has been running for 1.5 years now, there's still a lot of stuff to discover and research. And the community is always trying to like do this research process together, right? But it simply wasn't realized that there wasn't enough data to like understand how much of a reaction a particular interest rate change would have on the system. So basically, the governance of the system underestimated how much the interest rates would have to go up in order to stabilize the price. And what's now happening is that there's this intense effort to actually try to find the right point where there will be an equilibrium between supply and demand. And once that's found, it'll be, the system will just get closer and closer to really high liquidity at a stable price. And in general, over time, as the governance of the system matures and gets better at doing its job, the stability and liquidity should just further increase.
Okay. So you mentioned obviously a little bit about how the community are still, and everyone's sort of doing research to go further. And also you mentioned about your beta testing within the multi-collateral design. But what kind of other future goals and plans do you have for MakerDAO as a whole?
So the future goals and plans of MakerDAO as a whole are really impossible to predict, because the project is designed to go, hundreds of years into the future and ultimately be controlled by the community and, probably evolve into a very advanced form for art in the future. But so for the short run, the goal is still just to launch the system, right? And this is where the foundation, which is, what I work for, right? And sort of the team that is actually initially creating and bootstrapping the system. Kind of what we're doing is just getting the basic system up and running so that it can become fully autonomous and can reach what we call critical mass, which is that it'll be able to maintain itself over time without any sort of, anything needed from the foundation or any other sort of particular party, right? But rather the community as a whole can keep it running. And there's basically a couple of steps towards finalizing or fully bootstrapping the system. So step one is launching multi-collateral DAI, right? So that's the most important thing, because multi-collateral DAI is kind of like the foundation for the system itself, right? And then step two is adding security tokens as collateral. So that means adding real-world assets into the collateral portfolio, so that you can have things like stocks and bonds and commodities like gold or steel or whatever. Basically, all the various real-world assets, real estate, like all of these more stable, more well-known types of assets that ultimately can provide a strong foundation for a monetary system. And then finally, after we have security tokens as a part of the collateral portfolio, the last step is to launch synthetic assets. So synthetic assets means opening up the stablecoin space beyond just the US dollar, and in fact have many different types of stablecoins, first of all, right? So Euro, CNY, all of these different currencies, like different stablecoins that are all backed by the same single economic system, which is the Maker platform. But actually also beyond just stablecoins pegged to currencies, but even into what we call synthetic assets, right? Which is things like a coin that has the price of gold, or has the price of a real estate index, or other similar type of very, I would say very innovative, financial / crypto products, right? That take on a lot of new types of, characteristics that just really opens up a completely new frontier of what you can do with blockchain. And once all of these things are in place, the plan is then essentially to dissolve the foundation. So have the foundation itself, which is right now like the Maker team, right? That's bootstrapping the system. Actually wind that down. So dissolve it and split it up potentially, or there's many different ways that you can actually do a dissolution, right? But ultimately the goal is then to end up with a system that is then fully controlled by the community. And of course also make sure that at this point in time the community is very well prepared and very well educated and has all the resources necessary to actually run the project in a stable equilibrium for a very long time.
Okay. Sounds like you have some really strong ideas of where it's going to go next. It's such an interesting stablecoin to learn about, and that it just seems to have such a strong foundation to it. I did have a couple of questions from the MakerDAO community. So the first one was someone wanted to know why the fees are going up and what will this involve?
Right, so I already touched upon this to some degree, right? So the reason why the fees are currently going up is because of this supply and demand imbalance issue, where there's too much supply and there's not enough demand, which is fundamentally a symptom of interest rates that are too low. So the fees are going up to basically stabilize the price of DAI in the market. And I mean, theoretically, what should happen is at some point the fees reach the equilibrium point where DAI is very well stabilized, and perhaps from there will actually start decreasing. As for instance, perhaps there's more demand for DAI coming out of all the new partnerships and all the new ecosystem projects that are coming online. And I mean, and ultimately it really comes down to like the market dynamics of people who want to borrow DAI versus people who want to hold DAI.
And then the last question from the MakerDAO community was someone wanted to know what role AZ16 has and how they're getting involved in the project. They said that there was a lot of talk about how they were going to help everything move forward smoothly.
Right, so we actually did 2 MKR sales to Andreessen Horowitz. One in December 2017, and then a second larger one in what was it, September or something like that, 2018, right? So about a bit more than a half a year ago now.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that, I mean, so the foundation has sold MKR to a lot of different institutions, right? A lot of VCs, a lot of institutional buyers. Very early on, it was also sold directly to community members. But nowadays it has to be sort of done a little bit more strictly because of emerging crypto regulation. But what's unique about Andreessen Horowitz is that they have a massive team of people that essentially support their portfolio companies, right? So basically, Andreessen Horowitz works very closely with the foundation in a wide range of issues. Primarily, I would say soft issues, right? So things like HR, regulation in particular, right? That's really more than anything else. The value we see in Andreessen Horowitz is that they really are able to help the project guide I would say quite difficult regulatory landscape in the US in particular. But then there's also like PR, marketing, business development with institutions, and all of these things that as a crypto team we originally didn't really have a very strong capability to approach ourselves. But then now, I mean, ever since doing this deal with Andreessen, which is again more than half a year ago, which is really an eternity in crypto time, right? Of course, the foundation has evolved significantly, and that's really more than anything else also what they have contributed to, right? Is really building up the capabilities of the foundation so that it's a team that is very diverse in the sense that it's not just developers, right? It's actually a lot of different functions that can handle all the various issues that you have to be able to deal with in a competitive business environment.
Okay, that was really good to hear more about their involvement with the project. That was our final question for today. It's been great to have you on the channel, Rune. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation of an interview and coming on the channel. It's been great to have you here. I really enjoyed when I did my research about the Maker project and finding out more about it. It seems like it has a really strong foundation. A lot of people are aware of it because it's been around now for a long time. It was one of the first. So it's really good to know more and understand more about it. And hopefully one day we might be speaking with you further about more developments. It seems like you've got a lot in the pipeline for what's going to be happening with Maker and DAI in the future. So hopefully we might be having further interviews in the future. If everyone enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe by pressing those buttons down below. And thank you so much for coming on the channel today, Rune. It's been a pleasure to have you here on our channel.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and be sure to leave us a comment. You can also check out our social media pages in the links in the description, and head to BBOD.io to find out more about trading on our exchange. Thanks for watching.